general. More so, is regulation a hindrance, or is it going to be something that's actually going to drive the next wave of adoption and push this market into new levels and new highs? So rather than introduce my esteemed panelists myself and screw up on half their bio, I'm going to let them come up and introduce themselves. Before that, just a quick intro to myself. My name is Kevin Merkel. I'm CEO of CoinMetro. It's a digital asset platform based in Estonia, and also the CEO and co-founder of the European Crypto Association, which is a self-regulatory body that we're creating around Europe, looking to get pathways into Asia as well to help companies basically understand all the regulatory hurdles that they currently face, what they will face, and where this big regulatory jungle is going to end up in the next 1 to 2 years as we move not only from in Asia, but also in Europe and across the US, and see how the basically the ABCs of regulatory and really start to push in and hone in on crypto and adopt current laws and maybe create new ones. So without further ado, I'll have, I guess, one of our first panelists come up. Raphael, let's see if he's mic'd. Introduce himself, and we'll carry on.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, hello, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Raphael. I'm the CEO and founder of Blockchain Punk, which is an accelerator program in Berlin. We are focused mainly on securities, launching STOs, but with a focus strong in fintech, blockchain, and also in regulated solutions. So we had in the past some reference projects also with cryptocurrencies. We have established a cooperation with Dash last year, where we have a lot of hackathons with banks, a lot of workshops with regulators, with official financial institutions. And I'm also, as a co-advisor in this German Startup Association, we are right now thinking about the future of tokenizing the German startup ecosystem. So I'm happy to join the panel. Thanks for the invite. And let's deep dive the regulation.
Thank you, Raphael. Okay, so now I think next up, mic'd up hopefully somewhere here, we have, I think, Jason Hugh, maybe? So we'll have him come to the stage. Hi, Jason. Welcome.
How's it going, everybody? My name is Jason Xu. I'm a member of parliament and a legislator from Taiwan. I'm a technology entrepreneur turned legislator. So when I become a politician, my friends joke that I joined the dark side, which is not true. I think it's important for someone like me who can speak the language on both sides. One is technology, one is public policy. So my focus in the parliament is to bring in progressive legislations on crypto and blockchain. So for the last 2.5 years, I have introduced fintech regulatory sandbox, which is basically a regulatory exemption for fintech startups to operate it without liability in Taiwan. And also I've released the cryptocurrency guidelines, which allow exchange operators to register as a business in Taiwan. And most recently, Taiwan is poised to release the first ever STO regulatory framework in Asia. And I'll be the one who's championing and writing the legislation. So I'm very excited to share all of you about this exciting news, and also happy to join the panel and also explore the opportunities and some of the challenges that we face in this industry. Yeah.
Thank you, Jason. All right, so apparently we lost one of our panel members, but hopefully he shows up here in the next couple minutes. So we're gonna carry on. I'm gonna make the first question nice and easy. Basically, the title of our little sit down here. So when it comes to regulation in general, the question is to you guys: is it a good thing? Is it something that's going to push crypto, let's say, into the next wave of mass adoption, or is it a hindrance? Is it something that's going to, like you hear many people talk about, a lot of crypto maximalists will say that it's going to hinder innovation, and that at the end of the day that we should be able to operate in some type of unregulated space. So the question is it good or is it bad, essentially? We'll start with Raphael, and then we'll get Jason's take.
Yeah, I like that question because I think that's a general view about your political view on cryptocurrencies. So from the cryptocurrencies perspective, of course, regulation sucks. It's really something that we know. They have like the t-shirts with fuck the banks. They build it something which is a kind of digital freedom, and that's okay. I think we should leave that with that. And not all solutions should be regulated. But I'm also a fan of regulation. Why? Because I would love to have a solution where my mom can buy a Bitcoin in a secure and safe way, where she really feels comfortable. And today, it's not the way it is. So that's why I'm a fan of regulation. I think we have a good future now to focus on that, to find some solutions who are really doing it.
Yeah, so I think we are at a point in time where regulators play a very, very vital role to carry on this industry. For the past 18 months, we've seen a craze in ICO, and after the sort of bubble burst, and we've seen the market sort of calm down, and which is a good way to sort of drive out the bad actors. And what's important now is to really figure out a way for blockchain to make massive enterprise adoptions. And this is also a good timing for regulators to come together, to sit down with the community, with the startups, with the technologists to figure out what type of regulations that we needed. And obviously we talk about, for the last 18 months, it was all about ICO, utility tokens and all that stuff. But then as we headed towards STO, security token offerings, how do we redefine or reframe the whole capital market? I feel the largest issue we face now is this industry, this sort of still fledgling industry needed more outside input, which means that in the past it used to be just a small pool of people in this industry, but we need to introduce institutional money, we need to introduce old money into this new industry. That's how we change things, and that's how the regulators must embrace change. Otherwise, I think we will be stuck, very much, between a rock and a hard place. So I think it's important, I think at this point in time, that regulators talk about governance issues and how do we view this new asset category. So that's why I believe that the way I try to move things along is to educate the government and then also to bring in the industries to have a chance to communicate with the regulators, and so that we won't take a very strong approach and really allow the laws and the regulations to evolve as the technology evolves.
Okay, Jason. So you made a point there about what you'd like to see happen in the regulation space, let's say. Now, I come from regulated FX. I've been in that industry for 20 years. I've seen regulations fail miserably in retail FX across the globe: US, EU, Australia, Japan. There's been many things that have been done that have hindered innovation over the years, mainly because I think what really happens, what happens many times when it comes to regulation is companies, when regulation starts to get tight, they pull back. So instead of working with the regulator, like you mentioned, they start to find ways that they don't have to work with the regulator. They look offshore, they try to find loopholes, anything they can do to not work with the regulator and offer their services maybe from another jurisdiction, or perhaps simply stop offering certain services. So the question is, if we could have a checklist of things that we want to see from the regulator, what we want the regulator to do, what we think they need in order to make crypto really grow to its full potential, whether that be, in my mind, the tokenization of real world assets, or whether that's Bitcoin in Starbucks, whatever your idea of mass adoption is. What would be on that checklist? What do we want to see as far as what the regulator should do, at least in our eyes? So I'll start with Rafa and then we'll
Well, for me it's a quite easy way. Like, we should first solve a pain, then maybe use a blockchain solution for that, and then address it to the regulator if it's like really a thing which is maybe prohibited. So for example, in Germany, if you have a blockchain startup and you tokenize your asset, you are like an asset in a stock exchange. If you keep it for 1 year, then you are basically like charging the same taxes as with the normal assets on the stock exchange. If you hold it longer than a year, then you get like discounts. This is status quo. So, if now Bitwala, for example, which is the first crypto and fiat platform fully regulated and launched its operations now in January, is doing so, they said, imagine that we will sell Bitcoin and Ethereum to the common people. Please regulate us. So I think that's the way, that's the checklist of all solutions in all countries if they're going to introduce new solutions and having then a real use case with the regulators. And then they have also an area of interaction and they know what they should regulate. I think that's the checklist way.
Okay, Jason, anything to add?
Yeah, I think first of all is to start the conversations. Across the globe, I've witnessed several very good practices. For example, Australia, they set up digital chamber of commerce in their parliament. They lobby the legislators and the member of parliament to start blockchain caucus. And in Washington D.C., where there's also a group of members of House and members of Senate that also form a blockchain alliance. And for example, in Taiwan, I set up the parliamentary coalition for blockchain and cryptocurrency. And overall, I believe that it's not an isolated issue that the whole industry face a sort of friction between the industry development and the regulations. If you look at the evolution of internet, the first 10 years is really that everybody's trying to figure out how to regulate it. And then government sort of take a hands-off approach. And this is where the blockchain and the crypto, where the status is right now. And so I would encourage more industry, government communication. I don't think this industry should stand on the opposite side of the regulators. I think we should help regulators to figure out what are the most appropriate and suitable regulations should be. And number one point I want to point out is the jurisdiction issue. I think a lot of crypto involves the border-to-border, cross-border transaction, which basically deals directly with the jurisdiction. So how do different countries figure out a way that when cross-border transaction is happening on crypto, how do we view this new type of activities? So I think that's something really important. And make no mistake about it, we've already seen the IMF president, Christine Lagarde. She recently gave a speech on the central bank digital currency, and I feel this will be something that G20 governments will start looking at. And at least from what I know, the country of Argentina has already studied the possibility of bypassing the SWIFT for the country-to-country remittance on pure crypto. And in Taiwan, we are also experimenting, issuing our own national digital currency for the trade finance. So I think depending on the national strategy, you should speak with your government on engaging the idea and the concept of cryptocurrency and the blockchain on a national development strategy.
What I would like to add to this checklist is, because you're talking also about what you're doing, guys. I mean, one of the checklists for all countries should be to have an open sandbox where entrepreneurs can jump in, and then we have a nice pool of exchanging ideas. The government then have reliable entrepreneurs where they can have a look at it, and we have like a reliable source to be like somehow regulated. But this is not a standard. I know in Singapore there is a sandbox. There are projects like Marco Polo where banks are trying to make proof of work interactions and assets.
In Germany, in the UK as well.
So you see, and in Germany we do not have an official sandbox. We are just like starting discussions right now to open one. So you see, there are big differences in the countries.
The problem with sandboxes is the laws literally state in most countries, UK included, that in order to get into the sandbox you need to be licensed. So chicken and egg scenario.
Yeah.
You can't get into the sandbox without a license. You can't get the license without going through a sandbox.
Our sandbox is a little different. It's application based. And we have a 60-day response time. So right away, anyone in this audience can apply, and within 60 days, we'll give you an answer, yes or no. If we believe your case could, in the future, provide the foundation of law amendments, that we will work with you to develop your sandbox applications. So I encourage all of you to look into this, and we take a different approach than most countries.
Different approach is needed, that's for sure. So I'll let Ricardo introduce himself.
Yeah, always. So my name is Ricardo Lamana. I actually the co-founder and CTO of Crypto Wallet Tech. So computer science background, coming here into the regulation part. Yeah, I'm glad to join you on this panel, and I'm also happy that we're having this panel where actually there's no lawyer involved. I mean, your background is lawyer.
I'm not a lawyer.
So it's cool to have like another
I create law, but I'm not a lawyer.
Exactly, perfect. Yeah, so just give me a little short introduction what I'm doing. So basically we are trying to achieve for the future a network of exchanges that are trying to push forward to build this framework around getting security tokens listed on the exchange. So the future goal of what we're doing is basically to start with Europe and then see where we can go from there to establish a connection to every other continent. This is like probably the future goal which we can achieve in like many years. We don't know how long it's take, but yeah, basically I'm also together with Raphael in the talks with the German government where we are trying to push forward with the regulators a proposal to see that we can like make it easier for startups to achieve the license for a security token, and also see from there where we can build work to make exchanges more accessible to not only accredited investors, also to like low investors who just want to invest like a little chunk of money into any other assets.
All right, well, thank you, Ricardo. Let's talk about tokenized securities, since the topic was brought up. So I say tokenized securities only because, and this is an opinion, I'll write that over the top of my head before I say this, but there's no such thing as a security token. There is not yet any legislation anywhere in the world that dictates. Now there are frameworks, there are guidelines. There's no legislation yet about what a security token is. But there are many, many legislations around the world on what securities are. And when you draft a security subscription agreement, you can tokenize it right in the subscription agreement. So talking about current regulation around the world, there are many places in the world you can literally have an STO offering today, legally, 100%. The problem is, however, is that where do you list this token? Where do you get the liquidity from? There's really only three reasons to have a tokenized security, right? You have negotiability, almost instant negotiability, you have transferability across borders, and you have secondary market liquidity. So if we take out secondary market liquidity and the transferability across borders, why are we tokenizing? So the real crux, in my opinion, to really get this going is not MiFID II. It's not about establishing frameworks on what security tokens are or tokenized securities are. It's about the transferability. So the secondary market being regulated, MTF license here in the EU, or in the EU, sorry. In the US, you have an ATF license. That's the license you need to be able to list as a broker-dealer tokenized securities. You can do that today, right, if you have that license. But how do you handle the registration? The big crux is the registry, right? In the US, there is a digital registry for securities since probably the last 15, 20 years. It went on the blockchain in 2017. However, when you're talking about transferability across borders, which is one of the reasons to tokenize, one of the biggest reasons to tokenize, how do we get to the point? Because even if the regulations were to come today, MiFID III came out tomorrow, and everybody in Europe was happy. Taiwan came out with an STO framework. Everybody listed these STOs. But if you're only able to get secondary market liquidity, only one of those three things, what's the point? So how do we go from all these countries doing their own thing to getting all the countries on the same map, looking at the same thing? And that problem is, and I hate to say this in a group at a crypto conference, but centralization of a registry body where all these different, let's say, broker-dealers can communicate to pass on the ownership of these digital securities. How do we get to that point? And is there even a way to do it in a decentralized manner? So who wants to tackle that one first? I'll start with the guy that came in late, so Ricardo.
Yeah, so first of all, I find it really difficult to see where we can head in the future, because right now everyone thinks that he has to get or to wait for the government to build this STO framework, which already exists. Like we discussed it earlier, it's possible to do your STO everywhere, globally, and put it to the public. But then you can have you have just your issuer, which gives you the security token, and then you have no liquidity. So basically, it's nonsense to do stuff like that. So the reason what we want to do is we want to achieve like a global market where we can push out our security tokens to everywhere, right? So how do we achieve that? That's the question. It's first of all, it's I guess education, because the main reason we're doing security tokens is because we think that there's like a liquidity, but we need to like educate institutional investors to not only to a new format, also to invest in our company. And yeah, I think it's really a difficult to approach to see how we can manage these governments together to see like in a centralized way that we can combine our powers and see, make a proposal. Hey, we want to trade these security tokens cross-border. How can we achieve that? It's really difficult.
The point is that electronic trading has existed for decades.
Yeah, exactly.
So I can buy a stock in Japan, I can buy a stock in Norway, I can go to the Baltics and go to NASDAQ, I can buy a stock, whoop-de-doo. The problem is when I buy that stock, if I want to liquidate it, or if I get into a closed-end fund and it's got a 30-year maturity date and I want to liquidate it, all these things are the problems that a true tokenized security offering can solve. But everybody's focused on the regulation that exists, for the most part. What they're not focused on is logistics, right? And that's the question, the logistics. How do you get, first of all, how do you sell a centralized repository to people that are, right now, the big keyword in crypto is decentralization. And decentralization on paper, just like, I don't know, communism on paper sounds awesome. And democracy sounds awesome on paper, and so does socialism. But we failed at all those things in the real life, right? So how do we, is it possible to do this decentralized, or is that impossible? And either way, how do you actually get it done? Because even if everybody and their grandmother has an MTF license, and everybody can list these tokenized securities, and everybody gets authorized to actually create and issue them, so what? Because at the end of the day, if you can't transfer those things across borders instantaneously, and the countries that are doing this then are going to want to be able to tax these assets, there has to be a repository somewhere. So that's the question. And MiFID 3 or MiFID 2 or the EU or the FSA, they're not going to solve this problem. This problem doesn't get solved at the regulatory level. It has to get solved at the private level and get sold to the regulator. Right?
So perhaps the central issue of the transferability is the ownership.
Yeah.
I think we need to redefine the concept of ownership in the digital age. You think about the whole idea of tokenized security. I think that's a great way to call it, rather than security token, is to really think about what's missing in our current regulations, what's missing in our current lawmaking, which is the idea of a digital assets. We've never in history, really talk about what it means to have a digital asset. And I think there has been discussions going on around the world. In the EU, we see the GDPR, and in some jurisdictions in the region, we've seen governments start taking serious discussions on this. And even in a country like Taiwan, we face global competition, and we face competition from China, and we're trying to figure out how do we make the law so that it addresses the competitiveness that gears towards the future. So I think the idea is to really figure out the ownership of digital assets, and then creating I would say, an overhaul of a current existing law, or create some sort of exemption so we can make some experiments. And then for important countries, especially head of the regulators, to really talk about it. I think most of the times heads of the regulators refrain from talking about it, is that government just have no clue how to get a piece of it. I think that's the issue, because they see, all these crypto guys, they are making money and we cannot tax them. But I think if we bring in the whole taxation discussion, I think everyone here wants to be regulated and in a good way that this industry can prosper and then sustain. So I think it's very important that we look at this issue, in a straightforward ways, which is the ownership of digital assets.
I think I'm a fan of easy peasy use cases, and I would take that exercise to find a solution in here. Let's take the UN, the United Nations, to the table and say, guys, imagine we do with you one portal globally, like all stock exchanges in the world, the other crypto exchanges and the classical asset exchanges. They're linking into this one big ecosystem, and then we have a one big ecosystem where the values and the wealthiness of the people can be shared everywhere. And then we have a use case to build around something which maybe is a global regulated situation. So I would love to deep dive such a project.
Before we open up for some maybe audience questions to see if anybody has I just want to make a point on that, is that I think a lot of people, and I've talked to a lot of regulators, just like Raphael, obviously Jason, I'm sure, has talked to many regulators outside of Taiwan as well. And we've all done the same thing. We've all been on, everybody's doing the same thing. Everybody talks to the same people. we all hear the same answers. And I think there's a misconception that regulators, and this misconception is probably due in part to what they say and their narrative that they give, or their public narrative, in that crypto is, for money launderers and drug dealers and, all this other nonsense. Which, at the end of the day, when it comes to financial products, they're all used by drug dealers and criminals when they first are released. Checks, credit cards, all these things were used by criminals when they were first released. Why? Because when something's new, it's easy to get around, it's easy to break the system, and they break it. Eventually the system gets better and they stop using it. When it comes down to it, though, regulators are starting to see that the end game, this tokenization of assets, gives them 1,000% more visibility into the movement of assets. There's a statistic out there that says $1 trillion US dollars in $100 bills is currently laundered around the world in a constant 1 trillion. That's 13% of the overall physical supply of US currency. That's massive. And it's a systemic issue. It can never be solved unless there's no more paper currency. Any issue that has to do with blockchain when it comes to compliance and regulation is a technical issue and can 100% be solved. So I do think that they're starting, regulators are probably coming around more so than some of our maximalist friends in the crypto space. I think a lot of maximalists want to see that Bitcoin white paper become reality. And I think it's possible, but it's not going to happen unless we go through regulation first, unfortunately. We have to prove these concepts before, and I mean really prove them. Not 10 years of buying pizzas on the blockchain is not how we're going to get to the point where we actually prove the concept. So let's open it up. We got a few minutes left. Let's see if we have any questions. I got my man Tone Vase here. We'll roll out that first.
Hey Kevin, so you actually led into that question. With the regulators do seem to be a little somewhat open to it, and someone like me isn't, because I try to explain how all of these platforms that your digital assets are being built on, whether it's Ethereum, Cardano, Tron, EOS, I think they all have the disadvantages of being decentralized while actually being centralized without the ability to solve the problems. So who holds the blame when you chose the wrong underlying database for your digital token that is no longer functioning, and you have people that bought into that token, and what do? It's like Ethereum doesn't work, now what?
I could give some insights because my background is computer science. So basically what right now happens that all normal stock exchanges all around the world are searching for a solution to digitalize their assets. I think it was last year where Robert Greifeld, the former Nasdaq chairman, said that in 5 years all stocks and bonds in Wall Street will be tokenized. And now I know, I have to know, to read over 10 white papers just about protocols and standards. And if you see every company claiming they achieved a new standard with whatever they achieved, by nature there is no standard. You have so many different kind of technology approaches and still you don't know which to choose from, right? I mean, it could be something centralized, it could be something using decentralization. I don't know which one is the best one, and it's a really, really tough question because then the government has to seek for an expert, and then we know what reputation advisors has in the crypto space. So it's really difficult to find the right product for this asset tokenization for regular stock exchanges. It's a really, really good question. But I think the way we should go for it is that not only people propose to the government their solutions to tokenize, it's also that the government starts actively to work together with the startup community to find a solution, and not only that everyone is claiming doing their own standard. The government should lead this wave, basically. That's my opinion.
I think there's a question of who leads the narrative here, right? So, every industry, it happens in every industry. It happens in electronics and technology all the time. When a new technology comes out, there's 15 standards, 50, 1,000, 10,000 standards, whatever. At the end of the day, one company leads the narrative and leads the push to make the change, right? So we have now with JP Morgan Coin, for example, which let's not talk about that too long, but the point of that is that these guys see the writing on the wall. They understand they can save money, that they can reduce staffing, that they're able to move money without having to pay SWIFT, 250, 350, 750 to move D1, D+2, D+3 transfers across the board, across the globe, and they can do it within their own network. So are they going to trust that innovation to an outsider? Are they going to use an Ethereum? Are they going to go and use a Bitcoin or a Lightning network? Absolutely not. They're going to build it from the inside out because it costs almost nothing to build. They can test it themselves. So over the next few years, we're going to see a huge amount of segmentation, right? Before we start to see, let's say, a standard protocol. You're going to see the logistics guys, FedEx, UPS, DHL, all these guys are going to come out with their own blockchains for logistical reasons. You're going to see trade finance do the same thing. You're going to see, we're already seeing remittance do it. And at the end of the day, there will be a standard. But we're not there yet, and we have a long way to go till we get there. And I think, at least to your question, I guess whoever made the choice to use that protocol is the one you should blame. Unfortunately, I think making mistakes in a new industry you can kind of get away with for a certain amount of time, right? This industry may be Bitcoin may be 10 years old, but the industry itself, well, crypto is much older than 10 years, but Bitcoin itself, crypto assets in themselves are about 10 years old, right? In the global space of what we would define as money, like the definition of money probably takes about 1,000 years to change. Every 1,000 years or so, we change the conceptualization of what money is. We're kind of in that millennia shift right now. We've been digital for a long time. We've had credit cards and transfers online. Nobody really goes to the bank anymore. So the fact that it's digital is meaningless. But the fact now that we're able to have systems that are transparent, that can allow the transfer of data, that's the newbie. That's the newbie in the room. But mistakes will continue to happen for sure. This isn't something that's tomorrow we're not going to have a perfect blockchain or a perfect solution for any industry. Right? We got some time to go before that happens. That's for sure.
So even though I'm a lawmaker and legislator, but I am very, very concerned about governments leading the narratives. I think government should play the role of facilitating the discussion and making the environment a little bit more open so that experiments can be made and that the technologists and the developers figure out the technical issues. For example, government probably looking at different protocols, Cardano, Ethereum, and different type of things for central government digital currencies. But then at the end of the day, the question we want to ask is, what is the true meaning of decentralization? Do we want a government that is a centralized body and a sort of authority to develop something that they claim that is originally designed for decentralization? I think that's a very central question that we must ask ourselves. And also, at the end of the day, the issue that we're trying to solve with blockchain and crypto, it isn't about moving money. I think it's about building trust system. I think the trust system was built with the old money or capitalism, as you would describe. I think right now we are headed to the stage where the redistribution and the financial inclusion can be invented through blockchain and crypto. And also this trust system can, for the first time in human history, can be authorized and granted for those who would not have access to identities and financial access. So I think that's the real holy grail for the crypto and blockchain that we are all fighting for here. So I hope everyone stick to this. And I think as time progresses, these issues, regulations will be resolved, will be evolved, and I'm very, very optimistic about it.
How are we for time? We're still good. Any more questions? I can always throw one out to the panel if nobody has one. You want me to do that? You want me to do that? Okay. All right. So nobody in the crowd. All right. So yeah. We're talking about things again that we'd like to see happen, right? My point to that would be that if you look at regulations in all industries in the last 50 years, from pharmaceutical to finance to Jesus, I guess you can go across the board to anything really, but if you look at regulations, they've all kind of followed the same path. And the one that I can bring a caveat into, at least in recent time, was FX, right? So FX, and I'll take the US as an example. So back in 97, 98, towards the end of 98 actually, you were allowed to actually create FX portals if you weren't a bank. It was a centralized market to banks, and it opened up out to the public, right? So people could come in and create their own FX brokers. They were able to get licensed. When this first started to happen, and right before it started to happen, before the regulation actually really came into effect, where it was more like a sandbox, let's say, there were people that, basically the regulator was saying that trading in FX and in currencies that weren't your own currency were high risk, they were highly volatile, you could lose all your money, you shouldn't do it. They're basically the same thing they've said about cryptocurrency, right? Over time, after scaring the people, they came in and started to regulate, right? And the regulation came in slow, then it came very swift, and then they ruined the regulation as the community themselves started to back up. The FX community backed up from the regulation, they moved away. So how do we, going into the future, where now 2019, 2020 are probably going to be the years of regulation. We're going to see many different shifts across. We're going to see places like Taiwan try to create new frameworks. We're going to see places like the US, the UK, and probably for the most part, probably under MiFID II and then eventually MiFID III in the EU, adapt existing laws to these. I wouldn't say they're new asset classes, to be quite honest. I don't think we've created new asset classes yet, but we've created as a new way, a new vehicle, a new delivery mechanism for assets we've already had since the beginning of time, basically. So what is, or how do we make sure, what do we do collectively? Everybody in this room that has Bitcoin in a wallet somewhere, people that run exchanges, people that are trying to talk to governments, aside from just trying to explain to them that crypto is the best way forward and this is great and this is the future, what do we do to make sure that happens? What type of initiatives can happen within the community themselves to make sure we're talking to the right people, right? So what are the key points we need to make, aside from what we've already made here on the stage?
Well, I think there is a lot of learnings from that past, because we have seen a presentation from the European Commission which says that 2016, 2017, 2018, these were the years of education. And they claimed that 2019 is the year where projects go live. And then there was a small sentence in the presentation, and we will all watch them. So this is a nice example that they're aware that there will be like maybe struggle moments. They're aware of that they cannot regulate everything from their own, but now they want to see facts. Now they made a basic regulation settlement. We can do some STOs, so we are now doing it. So we need to build up the ecosystem.
Is there a fear then that there's, because the US is very famous for this, they allow, then they prosecute, they wait for a judge to make a decision, and they use that decision to then create the actual legislation moving forward. So it's a bit of a cat and mouse game, where they say, yeah, do what you want, let's see what happens, and then they pounce. So is there a fear of that in Germany? Because I know that, at least in the US, there's a history of this type of movement, let's say.
Well, yeah, this is how we try to build the sandbox around. Like, give us a little bit room, and we show up what we can do, and then please regulate us if we want to be a real mass adoption thing. But yeah, I think the European Commission example is just a nice one to see that they're aware of it, that there will be also some after-regulation processes, that they cannot know everything from the scratch on. And I mean, 10 years ago, maybe 10 years now, everyone is like online with the smartphone, so the information flow is just different. So maybe the awareness is better. But I still truly believe that we need to have the sandboxes, and please, entrepreneurs in your countries who are sitting here, do it. Because this is the key to mass adoption. If you have something which my mom or my brother or your cousin can use it, and it's safe, then I think that's the time of mass adoption for crypto blockchain.
I would add one caveat to that.
So please do it.
Just because I'm a regulatory guy. So yeah. There is a saying around the world in many different countries, Russia, Mexico, a few other countries, it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission. And I would say when it comes to the tech side, the blockchain side, that makes sense. When it comes to the finance side though, guys, you gotta be a bit more careful, right? So, securities fraud in China is punishable by death. So I always like to throw that out on the table when we talk about these things. So when it comes to the finance side, guys like myself, while I do like to push the envelope a bit, there are frameworks already in place, there are laws already in place around the globe that I can find loopholes. Blockchain isn't an investment or isn't a financial product according to MiFID II, so I don't have to follow these legislations. And that's great, but that loophole is going to close at some point. So when it comes to finance side, if you are building something in finance, I would err on the side of caution. But outside of finance, you want to build the next blockchain for gaming or for delivering ginger snap cookies, I don't know, whatever it is, go for it. Definitely, push the envelope as far as you can. Get that forgiveness rather than that permission. I say that makes sense.
Just on the note of sandbox, I'm happy to provide our legislation for EU for references, and I think it will be something worthwhile checking it out. We've now have 22 projects in the sandbox, and each of them represents a concept that will potentially violate the law, but then we bring them into sandbox and then look at how law can be amended when that project is commercially rolled out. So I think that may be something that you guys would be interested to look at.
Yeah, I'm happy to do so. That's why we're here. Yeah, we see that Asia is quite faster in many matters than Europe.
I'd definitely like to have a conversation about the European Crypto Association as well, see what kind of bridges we can build in. I'm going to do one last question, if that's all right. Yeah, we got time? Okay. So last question, it's an easy one. Well, maybe. So we're 10 years into Bitcoin and crypto in general, Bitcoin being the first guy off the block, so to speak, when it comes to at least what we're talking about today on stage. So 10 years from now, does Bitcoin still exist? Are we still using Ethereum? Or have the guys that are now starting to push, let's say, the narrative in big industry, control and the tokenization of assets, like the Nasdaq chair, like the chairman said, that not only will it be possible in 5 years to tokenize all securities, they will be tokenized. So does that become the crypto market in the next 10 years, or do we still have these legacy assets? Will they still be around? From a regulatory standpoint, you gotta throw in some regulatory aspect into that answer as well.
Yeah, I think we will have both, because like the most important thing is obviously like Coinbase and maybe Binance or other big exchanges will do their own security tokens on the exchange, but I think the real big leaders also who are working close together with the regulators are the stock exchanges at the moment, like the Wall Street, like in Germany the stock exchange, or every other stock exchange around in Europe. And I think that's like the most potential we have there, because these people right now are figuring out how to tokenize their assets, and probably they are the people the regulators have an ear for, that they will reach out for them and they will like working together with them. It's more, I don't know, like obviously Coinbase has huge resources to reach out for a structure to build their security tokens on top of their exchange, but I think the real future lies behind the people who already have experience in regulation, so that CEOs, like founder teams of these companies know what regulation is about, that they have like a good CV on that stage, and that they're not like people who just like made up an exchange to make like easy money. So it's important to get away from this like tokens and other pronunciation. We should like focus on digitalization of stocks and assets. We should push this to the regulators, to the politicians.
Just to push on the question again. So right now, Bitcoin, more than 50% of the liquidity in the market, right? That's how it's all 52, 53, it fluctuates. With the tokenization of every asset under the sun, does Bitcoin still control 50% of the market? And if it doesn't, if it's not the vehicle for liquidity, is there a reason for it to exist?
Yeah, like I mean, we have to look at the volume of Bitcoin, right? Because what is Bitcoin at the moment? It's 99% is just for trading. And then what is the other risk from the trading? It's like basically wash trading. Nothing else at the moment is Bitcoin. Like we of course have some value behind it, but it's not like what we see the future. Bitcoin can be some very good assets to be used for the future, but right now it isn't, because the people don't trust in it, because we are putting it in a bad shine, and the media also don't knows what they're talking about.
And from a regulatory perspective, if Bitcoin was regulated now as let's say another asset class, would there be more trust in the system or less?
Well, I think you asked like the basic question was what is the crypto space in 5 years?
Yeah,
after all, 10 years after the regulation.
Yeah.
So I think that we have still this altcoin market, which is like the historical background, the nerds, the believers, the communities, because that's a new freedom we have in that space. We have a new freedom, but then regulated assets, it will be a natural fight. The market, if one market is regulated, then a lot of fintechs will focus on that. And then will be consolidation, a lot of classical ventures, institutional investors will fight for the market. Maybe we'll have a new crypto PayPal, which is like then the Coinbase crypto PayPal, whatever. So I think it's a three-area market. Still this altcoin market with the communities, building like a lot of ideas, and then the regulated classical fintech startups or any other use cases who are popping up, where investors today are not in. Maybe JP Morgan is then one of the big investors in that regulated field. We will see. But I truly believe that the altcoin market remains.
Hey Kevin, why can't it be both, right? If everything goes to tokens, sure, Bitcoin can fall to say 10% of the total market cap, but no other asset is more than say 2% of Bitcoin, right?
Yeah.
So it can still be both. It can still completely dominate.
I'm not saying it can't be both.
Overall.
I'm not saying it couldn't be both. I do think Bitcoin was the first. It was first off the block, pun intended. But the question is that right now there's two sides to Bitcoin, right? There's the people that say it's a store of value. There's another one that say it's a payment vehicle. Great, and Bitcoin Cash is the true payment vehicle. All that nonsense. Yeah, but the point is that if it isn't those two things, what is it? It controls the liquidity right now. If you want to get in and out of this market, especially if you're an institutional investor, it's the only place to go for liquidity. But if it held 10% of the liquidity, is it still Bitcoin? I mean, is it still what it is today? That's the question. I do think they both can exist, but I think the market changes drastically over the next decade into what we're looking at now. I think it basically becomes the hammer in the tool belt for the finance industry. So, unfortunately, everything that the Bitcoin white paper was about becomes, kind of in the tool belt for finance, right? It's the fourth wheel on a three-wheel car.
There is an area which is maybe also growing, this is my opinion, like also value, fintech, payments. But imagine when the solutions are popping out of the gaming industry, when the points, the credit points which our children are playing every day, there's so much emotion in it. If there are coming now systems who are changing this gaming credit points into a real value that I can trade this on an exchange and that I can buy something on Amazon or somewhere else for euro, dollar, Hong Kong dollar, what else? This is like the big next step. Yeah. Imagine that social media likes today are not incentivized. And then you will look back and you say, yeah, that's 5,000 likes, but I have no money out of that. And people will say that, yeah, this was back in these days, it was like that. Yeah. So I think these are also new areas, new industries who completely grow.
There's a million use cases for closed loop systems, right? So, or open loop as well, but closed loop is definitely, you can tokenize an entire unit, you can pay your employees in the token, there's a million things you can do. But we're going way off of the regulation topic.
But that's a link to emotions, so that's why it's good growth.
Any questions from the audience before we wrap this maybe up? Nothing? Okay, guys. All right, well, appreciate you guys listening. Thank you to the panel. Thank you, Raphael.